Hi everybody, this is Liam Martin from Running Remote, and in today's video we're going to be talking about 11 horrible predictions of what's going to happen to remote work over the next 11 years. So I shot a video a little while ago talking about 11 great predictions for the future of remote work over the next 11 years, and a friend of mine told me, well, why don't you actually talk about the negative side of remote work? You always talk about the positive side, and again, a lot of people have considered me almost like a militant remote work advocate, and they're probably true, but I'm trying to look at it from the pragmatic side as well. There's a lot of positive stuff that's going to happen inside of remote work, but there's probably a lot of negative stuff that's also going to happen as well. And whether it's going to be more positive than negative, who knows? Time will tell. But I'm going to break down what I think are actually the worst things that are going to happen inside of remote work, if they are going to happen. And if you have any other ideas that you think are going to add into remote work, please put them down in the comments below. I'd love to be able to come up with a generalized list of where we think remote work is going to go from a negative perspective, because I always think about the positive aspects to remote work and I don't really think about the negative ones anywhere near as much. Oh, and by the way, while you're down there, subscribe to this YouTube channel if you have not. It is imperative that you subscribe to this YouTube channel because basically almost 90% of you have not subscribed, and that makes me very sad. So first off, I think the majority of tech jobs will leave the United States due to white-collar outsourcing within 5 years. I've been looking at the hiring space, particularly in the tech industry, and there's so many companies now that are saying they're going to go at least in part remote. Facebook, Shopify, Ford Motor Company is actually going remote. And in the majority of cases, when you look at their hiring strategy, they're not going to be hiring people inside of the United States. Little known fact, the vast majority of tech companies in Palo Alto and San Francisco actually hire first-generation immigrants and bring them to the United States. So they're generally not hiring Americans, they're importing the best talent in the world and they're bringing them to San Francisco and Palo Alto. That will no longer happen. That talent is going to actually be able to stay in their local countries, which is really good for their local countries, but really bad for the United States and other Western countries that are dependent upon that top tier talent to be able to infuse their local economies. So I think that this is really gonna change the way that we see work happening over the next 5 years. And I do believe that what I'm gonna term white collar outsourcing will be a major source of not just a brain drain, it's almost like a reverse brain drain, but like an economic drain from the Western economies of the world. Next up, the lack of need for office space will spur on a bigger economic crisis than COVID over the next 3 years. This is one that I don't know why more people are not paying attention to this. A lot of the leases that you usually do for an office space last 3 to 5 years. So a lot of people are coming up on their office leases that they can't necessarily get out of. But when I talk to remote advocates and people that have recently switched over to a remote work model, they're telling me en masse that they're not going to go back to their office. They're either significantly downsizing or they're getting rid of their offices completely, but they still have them. Perfect example is Salesforce. Salesforce spent over $3 billion on their new office in Palo Alto in San Francisco, and they are going remote. They still have the actual space. They have no idea what they're gonna do with it, but they wanna try to get out of it as quickly as humanly possible or downside that space as much as possible. This is something that's going to happen to all technology companies as everyone recognizes that physical office space is no longer needed in order to actually have a successful business. What impact that has on the global economy, I don't know, but I will tell you that in the United States, 11% of all dollars transferred through the economy are in the corporate office lease industry. It is buying office space. That's 11% of the US economy. If that got cut in half, that would be a bigger impact than the 2008 economic collapse. Very scary stuff, and we're already starting to see those cracks form in the last couple months. Touching onto that point, I think that urban economies will quite possibly collapse and cities will die. This is something that, again, I live in a city, I live in Montreal, Canada, which is a beautiful city, but last year they had 27,000 people, or 2019 rather, they had 27,000 people come to Montreal, and in 2020 they had 5,000 people come to Montreal. That is crazy when you think about the reality of how cities are really slowing down their growth. And you're seeing a massive exodus of very expensive cities like New York and San Francisco and Toronto and London, and they're all going to rural environments where they can get access to small towns and villages that have a better lifestyle, and the cost per square foot is quite literally 1/4 of what they would be paying in cities like San Francisco and New York. So I don't know what the future of cities are going to be, but if this trend continues, it is inevitable that cities will no longer be the same, and they are generally dependent upon a very small percentage of their population to pay all of the bills. It's quite literally the top 5% of urban environments. Those citizens are the ones that end up paying the vast majority of the taxes to actually run those cities. So when those people leave and they no longer are actually paying those taxes, I don't know what's going to actually happen to those cities. Some of them may actually collapse. Next up, governments will crack down on all location-independent workers for tax compliance. I've talked about this before, but tax compliance and location-independent workers, it's one of those things that we've never really talked about, but it is a huge, and I mean a massive economic problem, because the vast majority of location-independent workers are actually not tax compliant when they are traveling and working remotely. If you spend more than 6 months in a country, generally, you should be a tax resident of that particular country. But in the vast majority of cases, that's not done. They either declare their taxes from where they have citizenship or where they have their passport, or in some cases, they don't even do that. It's actually really, really scary. And as more location independent workers start to rise up due to the freedom that remote work will provide, I think a lot of these governments are gonna start cracking down on remote workers and saying, hey, guess what? You have to pay taxes inside of this country. If you come here, you're gonna set up a visa, but then we're gonna make sure that you actually are tax compliant here, and we want some of that money. So we'll see what happens on that end, but it's pretty concerning to me because a lot of my friends are digital nomads, and I think that a lot of them will end up paying a lot of taxes in the near future. Another scary concept that I have is I think that the Western post-secondary education system will actually collapse, and here's why. I think once we recognize that a lot of these jobs are going to leave Western countries, and the classic way of getting one of those Western jobs was to go to a really high-end Western university, that whole deck of cards is gonna collapse in on itself. It already costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to a reputable university, and it's way, way too expensive. I know for me, I was not able to actually go to the university that I wanted to because it was too expensive, and I literally went to a cheaper one that I could afford because I didn't have the money to be able to go out to those like Ivy League schools that are really the ones that everyone should be going to. But at the end of the day, I actually don't think that that education is worth it. You're no smarter when you come out of it. You're no better prepared when you come out of it. And I think the reality is as a lot of those jobs end up leaving the United States, a lot of people are saying, hey, you know what? I'm not getting on this stupidity train anymore. I'm not getting into this Ponzi scheme. I am going to make sure that I can actually get a job with the education that I'm getting, as opposed to just hanging out with my friends and partying for 4 years. Because of that, I think we're gonna see a lot of collapses inside of the university system. So to touch on that, I think that 50% or more of 100K plus jobs that are classically held by Western workers will be held by workers from developing countries. This is something that I almost it's so clear to me. I'd put this at like an 80% chance of happening, because as you're seeing more of these companies, particularly the Fortune 500, that have recognized, oh wow, we can actually work remotely now. We don't actually have to have a physical office. Why would they hire someone in their local headquarters or in their local area when they can hire someone that's completely out of their city, state, or country at 1/4 of the cost that are producing exactly the same result? You are going to see a wave of outsourcing that you have never seen before. And this is really good news for developing countries, which I'm really excited about, but it's very, very bad news for the countries that have classically just gotten those jobs because that was the person that was around, right? It's not just, I need to find the best worker in New York. It is, I need to find the best worker, period. And that's a completely different ballgame. So it's gonna get way more competitive for that US and local talent to be able to go after those jobs. My next scary one is, I think labor will have no bargaining power, as labor can go anywhere. National employment rights will go right out the window. So we've got a lot of really great systems in place right now to be able to make sure that workers have the rights in place to be able to have a minimum wage, as an example, or work effectively inside of their environment, making sure that they don't get abused, making sure that they don't get taken advantage of. And I think once you open up the market to the global economy, a lot of those things are gonna come up a lot more often, right? You're effectively gonna be able to hire talent a lot easier than you could before, and there's gonna be a lot more people competing for that one job from developing countries. And they're gonna wanna be able to work for cheaper than the workers that have classically gotten those jobs in Western countries. So where is this gonna go? It might actually go to a race to the bottom. I hope that this isn't true. I feel that this is probably like a 20 to 30% chance of happening, but it's more than a small chance that this could quite possibly be our future, where everyone now is going to be part of the gig economy. Whether you are a Uber driver or whether you're a $300,000 developer, everyone is actually going to be able to go after those jobs, and everyone's going to have to compete on the same level, which means that a lot of the employment rights get thrown out the window. Next up, I think that AI will replace the majority of white-collar work. And remote work, I actually see as a middle step to make the transition even easier. So when I think about this, and again, this is me thinking out 11 years into the future, I think a lot of the jobs that we currently do today will inevitably be replaced by artificial intelligence. And this is actually going to be incredibly powerful for the workers that are able to keep their jobs, because they're just going to be doing more and more and more creative work, as opposed to the kind of like middle work that you need, the boring stuff, to be able to get to the fun parts of your job. So for the workers that are able to keep working inside of that economy, they're gonna have a great time. But the widget makers, the people that are just the call center reps, as an example, I believe that probably the majority of call center reps will be replaced by an artificial intelligence within the next 10 years. And that's very scary, because that's actually, I believe it is a top 5 global employer on planet Earth. People quite literally answering phone calls or making phone calls to other human beings. And I think that'll all be replaced by artificial intelligence, because you'll be able to do it with one piece of software that's probably going to be very expensive when it first comes out, but it's going to break down to effectively nothing in comparison to paying $32,000 per call center rep times 10,000 call center reps to be able to get a particular division up and running in, let's say, a Fortune 500. So I see all of these jobs disappearing, and remote work is fundamentally actually going to make that transition a lot easier, because that's the first step to saying, hey, you're not in the office, you're working remotely, you are effectively a lot more replaceable, because we have a lot of processes in place to be able to make sure that you're replaceable inside of remote work, which again makes a better organization, but is also necessarily not that good for the employees. So we'll see how that goes, but I think it's a pretty good chance that a lot of those jobs are gonna go bye-bye and never gonna come back. Next up, I think asynchronous communication will stem further mental health issues among extroverted employees. So inside of remote work, we have asynchronous and synchronous communication. It is pretty clear at this point that asynchronous communication makes for a more efficient organization. And that is effectively not communicating with people live, but instead communicating with people asynchronously, not on a Zoom call, but through email, not on a in-person chat, but in a Slack message. Minimizing the amount of synchronous work allows for someone to maximize their deep work, and because they can maximize their deep work, then they can actually become much more effective employees. The problem, however, is extroverted people absolutely hate this. They want to interact with people, and a lot of the people that work inside of large corporate environments, their friends are actually their workmates. And a lot of those people over the pandemic have had very serious mental health issues, and this will only expand because they'll recognize that asynchronous communication is a better business model. So the people that were at least getting some type of synchronous communication through Zoom and stuff like that, they're actually gonna get less as the models roll out, and we're gonna recognize how to be able to work effectively remotely. So it's really important to be able to have that mental health in place and those mental health professionals in place, because those people, they're not gonna have a good day. Next up, I think that baby boomers will steal jobs from younger workers, as they will be able to work remotely as consultants on the side much more effectively than their younger counterparts. And this is a real problem just generally inside of the work industry. You find people that just kind of hang on a little too long, and particularly someone in their 60s who knows what they're talking about, knows the job better than anyone else. At a certain point, them staying in that position really stops someone else from actually getting a full-time position. And so I think there's gonna be a huge amount of these older remote workers that are just gonna come in and provide a lot of consulting services, because they'll make an extra 10, 20 grand on the side every single year, and they'll be super excited about it, but it will be coming at the expense of those younger workers that really need that critical experience within the first 10 years of their career in order to actually become successful workers and build a real career. So I don't know where that's going, but I definitely know that a lot of those people are going to be going after those jobs on a consultancy basis. And I think it could quite possibly have real negative implications for the rest of the work world. My last point, and this has already happened, but I thought I'd throw it in here, is only rich people will benefit from remote work. The poor will suffer. And this is true already. You are 4 times more likely to be able to work remotely if you make more than $100,000 per year. Thought workers, people that work from their computer, they are the ones that are able to get access to remote work. And they also, by extension, have a higher salary on average than people work in retail, or Uber drivers, people that deliver stuff, people that work in restaurants. These are all the jobs that generally can't really go remote, and they're not getting the benefits from remote work. So the poor are already suffering on this. Again, for me, it's one of those things that I don't really know how to necessarily solve for that. I think that as developing countries are able to get access to the labor market in a better way, and there's more access to the internet from those developing countries, I think a lot more of those people will be able to get those great job opportunities. But as of right now, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and I don't really know how to solve that, but remote work is definitely accelerating that shift. So if that scared you, put it down in the comments below. If there's any other scary stuff that you think is gonna happen inside of remote work, put that down in the comments below as well. I would love for you to be able to scare the living daylights out of me. But that will be incredibly exciting down in the comments below. And while you're down there, why don't you like this video and subscribe to this YouTube channel? It is indeed free, and we talk about remote work stuff all day long. See you next video.